I hereby call this special meeting of the council and this council budget workshop to order. Jody, do you need to take roll call, or are we?
Yes. Councilmember Jeans.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway will be here a little bit late. Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Ross has requested to be excused. Councilmember Lassay has requested to be excused for part of the meeting. Councilmember Sundwall.
Here.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Here.
And Mayor Larson.
I'm here. We have a motion to excuse Councilmembers Ross, Lassay, and Holloway.
So moved. Second.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Just note, while the meeting is open to the public, none of you from the public can, there won't be an opportunity for comment. For any of you that live here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert. Kick it off. Go ahead, Robert.
Can everybody hear me okay?
No.
Or you can sit at the table. Robert, if that's more comfortable, just sit there and use that microphone.
Mr. Hammoud, are we able to see this presentation on our computers or just on the screen?
Sorry about that, Robert.
Do you know?
Testing. Okay, so tonight is the first of 4 budget workshops, and this is the budget workshop agenda that we prepared. So tonight we're going to go just over a brief budget overview and summary. We're going to have a discussion on the proposed 1% property tax, and then we're going to have an introduction to the fleet in the equipment repair and replacement fund. And Thursday of next week, we will have most of the department operating budget presentations. We'll have the administration budgets, the police, fire, community development. Wednesday the 25th, that's the meeting we moved from that Thursday. That will be the public works operating budget presentations. Parks and recreation, streets, utilities, fleet, and facilities. And then Monday, October 29th, that's the 4th and final session. We'll have capital budget and long-range discussion, and then a wrap-up of any outstanding items that are generated from the previous 3 workshops. And so the 2019-20 budget elements, again, we're targeting a balanced budget funding, infrastructure needs, capital projects, and setting aside reserve funds. Budget assumes new community growth and development. All new funding enhancements and requests integrate into the 7 council goals. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. Capital spending will include funding for sidewalk repairs, street overlays, parks improvements, and utilities bond-funded projects. Department-specific enhancements will be presented to council for discussion during the next 2 budget workshops. And so hopefully you can see this a little bit busy slide, but I wanted to outline the goals and objectives and how we've addressed it so far in the proposed budget. And again, you'll have plenty of opportunity when the departments present to you to weigh in on the enhancements that are proposed within the budget. Goal number 1, provide an economic base that supports the approved long-range city revenue goals. Sub-item there, responsible growth forecast built into the budget, as well as additional funding for city events, signage, and marketing. That also fits under one of the following goals, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But we want to make sure that we're not living beyond our means, of course, and that we're also funding and addressing the best we can the infrastructure needs of the community, public safety needs, keeping up with the operations of the city adequately. Goal number 2, provide for a budget and financial plan based on departmental goals. And the departmental goals were carefully constructed to match the council goals and core services of the department. Each department's going to present to you next week and the following week, and you'll be able to hear their goals and objectives, and also just a brief summary of their work plans. Operating budget was developed for sustainability. So again, we're not trying to put a lot of one-time funding. We want long-term sustainable expenditures and built into this budget. So that was our goal here. So we can address the goals of the council, not just in the short term in the 2 years, but over a 5 to 10 year period, the best we can. Goal number 3, proactively maintain and sustainably replace needed city infrastructure that meets current and future goals. And part of that is increased funding for sidewalk repairs, pedestrian enhancements, parks improvements, and street overlays. And again, we're going to go over detail on the 4th meeting on the capital. So increase in long-term capital funding to meet infrastructure needs. And of course, we have the $32 million bond issue funding water, wastewater, stormwater projects through 2020. And of course, the rest of that spending that hasn't occurred already will happen in the 19 and 20 biennium. And so goal number 4, provide and protect services, spaces, facilities, and events that enhance residents' quality of life. And part of that is an increased events budget, facility improvements, and sustainable capital funding for future years. The all-inclusive playground, I know that's come up as a priority for many people. It's actually funded by our current capital budget plan, and the Public Works Department is actually going for a grant right now to get remaining funding for that park. So that's actually in our already approved capital from previous years. Goal number 5, advocate for multimodal accessibility to and from Snoqualmie to maintain or improve levels of service. This one was a little harder to quantify in this budget so far, but one element of it, though, is increased funding for pedestrian improvements and sidewalk repairs. Goal number 6, preserve and facilitate additional affordable housing for the workforce, seniors, and residents with special needs. And we actually have set aside in the Community Development Fund $200,000 of funding for comprehensive housing study and related works. Studies that we looked at as far as the cost ranged anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000, but this is making sure that we have a sustainable funding source for a study, any follow-up, any surveys that might come out of it. Goal number 7, improve city communications, understanding, and transparency with the city government and those we serve. This one, as far as expenditures, a little harder to quantify, but on the policy side, we're going to develop a citywide communications strategy and also increase resources as far as, using our website more, using social media more. We're going to have a comprehensive budget document that's going to look different than years past. So a lot of things that the city is going to do to fulfill goal number 7, just as a policy rather than spending additional funds per se on that. So this chart, this is just a brief 30,000-foot view summary of all funds. You can see we have the general funds, general reserve funds, special revenue funds, capital funds, utility funds, internal service funds. And you can see expenditures are more than revenues, and I just want to touch on the fact that that is the multi-year capital expenditures. So think of the bond issue. We already received the revenues in previous years. We received it in 18, but we're going to be spending it in 1920.
Assumption these are in millions.
In millions, yes. Sorry, it didn't transfer over. And so you can see the bulk of that funding with the utility funds. You can see about 23.2% estimated in 19. Some of that will carry over to 20, additional 12 and 20. So you can see where that expenditure is happening.
Rob, would you go back to that one? Yes. So I'm looking at what you gave us at the last meeting we had on budget, and this handout, these numbers, I don't think agree with those numbers.
We've made some changes since then, so this is the most updated number. We did
Thank
a
you.
lot of fund studies and revenues, so this is the most up-to-date numbers right here.
Good.
So we will update that sheet for future
Good.
meetings.
Thank you.
General fund revenue sources, you can see estimated general fund revenue sources. This one I want to touch on a little bit. You can kind of see the percentages. So again, our main revenue source for the city is property tax. This includes the lid lift that happened a few years ago for public safety. You have transfers in, just a small fact. Part of that transfer in is money for stormwater that goes to parks, maintenance, trees, streetscaping, and overall maintenance in that area. You have license, permits, fees, and fines, so anything the city collects on that end. It's about 15% of the budget. B&O tax, about 0.7%. We are going to increase our enforcement. We think that there's more money out there. We're not sure how much yet, so that's harder to quantify, of course. And then sales tax, and this includes the public safety sales tax that we receive separately from the general pot. So that's $2.3 million. This sales tax number does not include the funding we set aside for the one-time funding for construction. So this is actually just ongoing quote-unquote regular sales tax that we received to the city, about 2.3 million. Utility tax, 3.1 million. Total estimates, about 16.6 million for 19.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sales tax, you say public safety, I'm not familiar with. What is it that we get as far as regarding public safety for sales tax?
We actually get an allocation from the state. It's a percentage each year.
Okay.
It doesn't fluctuate as much, but we actually received, and I could tell you.
Is that the 911 fees for cell phones, stuff like that?
Yes.
And there's a
Exactly.
domestic violence fund or something like that, too.
Yeah, that's a little piece of it.
Rob, I have a question.
Yeah.
And this is completely off topic, just pass on it. So on, on the sales tax, so that's our portion of the sales tax, right? The city's portion of the sales tax, as opposed to the state, right?
Correct. This is
So
what's coming to the city.
What ability or inability do we have to change that?
We can increase our sales tax locally.
Okay. And is that-
You'd typically have to be a vote of the public, you'd have to go for a vote of the public, and if they approve, like a 1/10 or 2/10 increase,
So that's not something the 7 of us would do, that's something we put on a ballot?
you'd have to be on a ballot. And we don't have the city attorney here, but I'm pretty sure that has to go to a vote. You don't have the authority to increase that by yourself.
And so the criminal justice share, and again, this is a different formula that comes from the state each year. It's about 413,000, and that, of course, goes to police operations. Utility tax, I think I spoke about this a little bit last time. Our utility tax is pretty robust, and because of the rate increases, that actually increases utility tax. And then anytime you pay your cell phone bill, you see it broken out. Same thing with your Comcast bill. You see, actually, it's mislabeled on the bills. They actually pay us as kind of like a B&O, so that the utilities actually pay the city, but they pass it on in terms of fees to their customers. So you see about 3.1 million for 19. It's 19% of the total revenues we receive for general fund.
In other words, not the same as utility fee. It's a tax on the fees that goes to the general fund. That's unrestricted general fund revenues.
So this does not include REIT, and it doesn't include,
No, this is only general fund.
Okay.
Yes.
Unrestricted general funds. Well, I guess some
Oh,
of the,
there's some,
yeah, okay,
general fund.
sorry.
2020 estimated general fund revenues, and so you can see we're projecting higher total estimate 17.6 million. You can see 2.3 million for sales tax. Now you see an increase in property tax for 8.5 million. So property tax lags in terms of the assessment. So think of the phase 2, some of the phase 2 properties that came online now. They won't be assessed till next year. Same thing with like the Hampton Inn and some of the properties. So we are anticipating property taxes to increase on that second year. So about 8.5 million. And see utility tax, again, we're still expecting growth with the rate increases and just user increases on that, 3.4 million. Sales tax, just about 3%, so it's not registering too much, 2.3 million. And then B&O pretty much about just the same there. So you could see where the growth is. The growth will be on the property tax side. Now, again, new construction, when we're anticipating growth in other funds going to the out years, and we're going to talk about this more when we get to capital on the 4th meeting, that is held separately, and so we're forecasting that
Can
separately.
you go back a slide?
Sure.
Do you know what sales tax was in 2018?
My estimate for 2018 is 1.4 plus 364. So that is,
0.8 almost?
yeah. So it did go up quite a bit this year.
Okay, and so you're expecting one more bump for 2019 and then flat for 2020?
For sales tax, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, sales tax, it was, hold on a second. Right, there's a little more bump there because we actually had a big spike in Christmas sales that was unanticipated. So that's the harder one to predict right now. So we're growing our general sales tax base about 5%, because again, public safety is kind of a fixed amount, that's part of it. We're growing our general sales tax about 5% the first year and about 3.5% the second year.
So you've gone from 1.8 to 2.3, that's $500,000 between 18 and 19.
Again, that's what we're looking at
Okay,
this point.
and then the next slide for 2020, I'm looking at 0%.
3%. It's approximately 3. It ends up being, it's very
2.3 to
negligible.
2.3.
Growth, you're talking.
Right, growth.
0% growth, yeah.
It's negligible.
I was going from 2.3 million one year to 2.3 million the next year growth.
It's not much.
There's no growth.
It's very small.
It's 0. Am I missing something?
You're rounding. It could be 2.399 to 2.300.
That's what happened. But it's actually not capturing the full story on sales tax because, again, this is just general fund. We are anticipating construction growth in 20, and so that is going to be higher than it actually is in 19. So if I'm looking at construction growth, and again, we'll talk about that more when we get to
Okay, I just
capital.
want to make sure we're not being too conservative.
Oh, no,
Keep
that's
going.
higher. That's much higher, actually.
Well, on our sales tax, we're at about an 8.6% rate in Snoqualmie, 8.65, I think, whereas.
Yeah, I'm going to have a slide for that.
Oh,
Just
okay,
a minute
thanks.
here.
Carry on.
Robert,
Yes.
on the property tax side, it includes a levy lid lift in 19 and 20. Remind me whether to do a levy lid lift, we have to do that annually.
No.
We don't have a levy lid lift built
No,
in.
the 1%'s different. You're thinking about the 1%. We're going to talk about that later tonight.
What is,
You mean the 1%, you mean, Bob, the adjustment?
Well, the state gives us 1%. If we want more, we have to legislate for it.
Correct.
Yes.
We're not putting more than a 1%. We don't have any levy lid lift in excess of 1% increases built into this biennium budget for 19 or 20.
Okay?
what is transfers in?
We do have 1%. The
I
minimum.
mentioned that that's actually, most of that money is a transfer from stormwater, but that goes directly back to the maintenance. So think street trees, parks maintenance, anything that's related to the drainage and the stormwater
Okay.
function. But we have transfers out as well. So again, if you're looking at proposed expenditures 2019, you can see transfers out I'm not including in that chart. That's about 1.8 million. Think about transfers to capital funds, for example, as part of that. Or transfers to, if we're transferring the construction out, that'd be part of that number too. So fire and emergency management, you can see just in general expenditures, about 22% of the budget. Police, about 35%. All the administrative departments, finance, everything upstairs here, 26%, excluding community development, 26%. Non-departmental includes any centralized expenditures or legal fees or anything that doesn't apply to any one department. That's about 800,000. Parks and landscape maintenance, about 1.8 million. And proposed expenditures again in 20. You can see transfers out about 2.1 million. Estimate about 15.4. So about 5.5 million for police, 4.1 million for administrative departments, 1.9 million for parks maintenance, and fire emergency management about 3.4 million.
Can you go back to the last slide?
Yes.
I just want to process for a second here.
Sure.
I thought Dan spent most of our money. What's going on here?
This is not his fund.
I know.
Part of
Oh,
it
I was going to say. What are we
Do we
looking?
count, so I see Snoqualmie Police, is that just Snoqualmie, is that counting?
That's just, yeah, not counting North Bend, no.
Sorry, this excludes Fund 130?
Fund 130 we are keeping separate at this point.
What's that?
That is an internal decision.
Accurate then.
That's been
These
an internal
numbers-
decision that we've made.
Right.
We're still deliberating on it, we're still thinking about
What's
it.
130? Sorry, I don't keep track.
Community development.
Huh?
Community development. We'll call it separately the next, when we have
Well,
the
but
meeting.
you can't say that these are the expenditures when you've taken a whole department and just excluded it.
But it's always been counted separately.
It's always been wrong.
So we have parks and landscape, but we don't
That's an
have.
opinion, that's something we're still researching and as
But
far
why-
as
why
the best
that
way to
part?
do it. Because again, we can't do everything in this
What
budget,
basis
we're
is
trying
that an
our
opinion?
best. I'm sorry?
On what basis is that an opinion? Why do you feel that that's an opinion?
I'm sorry, I missed it. You guys talking about the planning department?
I think you're in the weeds a little bit. We can have a side conversation about this.
Couple $1 million missing from this chart?
It's not missing, it's in the other chart that's rolled up.
What are we talking about? Are we talking about the planning department? or-
We're talking about a slide that says these
Do we
are
want to have a
expenditures.
separate discussion on community development? We can have a separate discussion. I can-
On the community development department, okay, I'm sorry.
We can, if you want one, we
But
can
why,
have one.
why not, why is that department taken out? Why not fire? Why not?
Because
I mean,
we've,
it's
Jim,
not
we've
in the
gone
general
back and
fund
forth over the years, in the
expenditures
early years when we were pumping out 350 homes a year and the Ridge was in its heyday. there was kind of debates on the council as to whether those, because the building department largely funded the planning department, those two were sort of tied together in their activities. So those were council decisions, you know.
Well, I'm just saying that this is a misleading slide. None of
Okay,
these.
this is not a misleading slide. I disagree with you, Councilmember Mayhew.
Okay, well, I disagree with you. This is. and I
This
will
is
tell
what the
my-
general fund is. Now, we can add, if we add the community
May I say
development, we can do
something?
that.
May I say something? I will tell my fellow council members that I believe this to be a misleading slide and these percentages all.
Councilmember Mayhew,
I'm
this
sorry,
is-
can
I
I say
disagree.
something, Mayor?
Yeah, sorry, Robert, if you could just, let me start sharing again so we kind of create some order here. I can't, informal isn't working. Go ahead, Councilmember Mayhew.
I want to say that I believe this to be a significantly misleading slide if we left out an entire department. The issue is not that the numbers I'm sure you have absolutely right in terms of the dollars, but the percentages are all going to be wrong.
So I guess my response is, and I haven't had the benefit of reviewing the rest of Robert's presentation. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt to getting some of their information and see how that pulls together, and then we'll have a discussion about the efficacy of it.
I just want my fellow council
All I'm
members to know I
suggesting,
think that.
Councilmember Mayhew, is that we've had where that pendulum and that conversation has swung in the past. He's picking up where the council by policy has sort of made those segregations and distinctions before. If this council chooses to weave it back together in a different way, that's fine. But I think the criticisms are welcome if he omits and doesn't address those community development pieces in the further on in the presentation.
Right, because there's some revenues that are not counted that are going directly to that 130 fund right now, so we'd have to change.
Councilmember
those.
Shepherd?
Well, in my past, whenever we group things together, generally, there's some thought as to if you want to maintain consistency, if there's been some history of grouping in a certain way, if you want to have some ability to compare year over year, it's simpler to maintain the grouping as it has happened in the past.
That's correct.
And I don't know if that's what happened here, but
So it's something we're looking.
So Robert, did you want to respond to either the comments or the?
It's something we're looking into more again. What is the best way to do it? I've heard the pros and cons. We have not made a management decision on this yet. That's why
Right.
I'm
So
not
you're-
showing it.
Yeah, in other words, you're not opposed to restructuring the presentation of those numbers or how they're accounted for the way Councilmember May was saying. You're saying you're just following kind of the practice we've done to date.
Sure. And I can actually recreate this slide that includes community development both on the revenue expenditure side and send it out to council.
So you could show sort of two different ways, or both ways of presenting it, or, okay.
Actually, when we get a break, I can do it. So yeah, not a problem at all.
All right, let's move on. Let's put the dollar back together again.
Yes, so Drew came up with this great chart here. Sales tax per jurisdiction. So there's a lot of questions on, where does your sales tax go? What makes up the 8.6%? So we wanted to show this. We get a full.
10 cents for every dollar.
Yes.
Sales tax revenue.
And we get. Go ahead.
Oh. And then basically, for every dollar of sales tax generated, for the most part, 76 cents of that goes to the state of Washington. If you want to hit the next. Another 10 cents goes to the county transit district, which in this case would be King County Metro. And then finally, there's a 4 cents out of every dollar goes to these other categories, which includes for criminal justice purposes, the county mental health and drug prevention services, and kind of an administrative fee that goes directly to the Department of Revenue.
Okay, so I was confused initially. You're saying of every dollar in sales tax that is collected, this is how.
Right, this is how small we
This is
get.
where it
So,
goes, okay.
Again, you could theoretically raise that 10 cents, but you can see that most of it goes to the state.
Robert?
Yes.
Just for clarification, we have no control over that allocation. Is that true?
right.
Correct.
Once we raised our sales tax.
Right, if you raise it, then the percentage just changed a little bit overall, or you could take a larger percent of that.
Or you banded together with other cities, went to AWC and tried to get the law changed. You could do that too.
Robert, in the presentation, I don't see any comparative data in local cities like North Bend. We're on the lower end of the surrounding communities because sound transit fees hit Issaquah and other areas in the contiguous urban growth area. North Bend chose in their transportation benefit rather than doing a tab fee. They went out to the voters and approved a 0.2% increase in TBD fee on the sales tax. And I think they also did one for a public safety levy. Did they not? I guess. So they're, because they like to say that Snoqualmie shoppers in North Bend help pay for their roads and all that. Councilmember Shepherd. So we have capacity if that's one tool we wanted to look for additional revenue in the future. Councilmember Shepherd?
So as far as gas tax, do we get something from that?
We do, it goes into our streets fund. It's approximately about a little over 300,000 right now.
But, so that's not accounted, where is that accounted for? That
This is
income?
this is
This
just
is
sales
sales.
tax.
That's
so
a different tax,
That's
yeah.
excise tax.
Okay.
So that's the fixed fee you pay at the pump. Now, the problem is, just on a side note with that fixed fee is, it's actually, unless prices went up again and demand went up, demand is slowly going down. So that's kind of a challenge for that fee, because as people get more cars that are fuel efficient, like I get 40 miles a gallon on my hybrid, they're filling up less. And so the problem with that fixed rate is that people are filling up less per gallon. So that's why people talk about road charges, other fees in the future to offset what's happening.
But
with
aren't
that.
there already, didn't the state already enact fees for like Teslas and stuff like that that are fully gas-free, that they pay extra either up front or something? And if so, do we get a portion of that that's relative to our, I mean, do we get a cut of that?
No. I don't know if that's been enacted yet or not. I know, coming from California, they just enacted that on the tab fees. But here, I'm not sure if it goes on the
They're
tab fees. We
fighting
can look
that.
into it, though.
I thought there was an increased registration fee of some
Yeah, it's
sort
probably on
for.
the tab fee.
Okay. But bottom line is, we don't get any of that yet.
It could come in the tab fees. We're going to look at that.
Okay.
It would probably be pretty small. Yeah.
Do we have any ability to increase gas tax?
No.
No.
I don't believe so. That's state jurisdiction.
Now,
I'm not aware of any local jurisdictions that have ever been able to impose gas taxes.
yeah, that's one of the differences that I've noticed. I mean, coming from California, in California, they actually put sales tax on top of the gas price. So, for example, we have 3 gas stations in Snoqualmie. Here, we don't collect any tax from the gasoline. If we were in California, we'd collect tax from the gasoline.
If Seattle hasn't tried to do it, then you must, it's got to be extra illegal, so.
Yeah.
No, I don't know what you mean by that.
And so sales tax in Snoqualmie, again, by category, I just wanted to show this based on category. This is year-to-date through August. You could see, again, our biggest categories here, wholesale and retail, and internet sales are actually integrated into that category, and that's where your growth is. So again, when people are shopping brick and mortar less, that's something where we could be a little conservative, but it's hard to see the overall trend, as I think Councilmember Lassay has commented before on e-commerce, because it's still a new trend. You know, it's only having, that spike has only been the past few years.
Sort of.
Yes.
Sort of.
So as far as the sorting, we still don't have that sorted as the biggest dollars at the top. But one of the things that stands out to me is the jump from construction, warehousing, manufacturing between 17 and 18. Do we have any explanation for what that jump represents?
Right, and I apologize. This chart did have the money before we transferred it out, because we were transferring all the construction. But construction was approximately $900,000 in 18 that we're actually transferring out. So this wasn't part of the total that I showed you before, because that's all the activity with like the Hampton Inn and the phase 2, the finishing of phase 2 of Snoqualmie Ridge. So that's all the construction activity.
Okay.
Or Safeway Motel.
Yeah, so again, it was about $500,000 in construction activity in 17, about $900,000 in 18. And again, we are building construction activity in 19 and 20, but we're building it directly into that fund. We're not touching the general fund in the future to do our forecast. So you'll see that when we get to capital.
Okay.
Does that include high school construction as well?
Some of it, yeah. I think some of it's
For
taxable.
materials,
So
yeah.
yeah, that's part of the activity. And actually, some of the construction for our facilities and some of the bond is taxable, some is not. Depends on who's making the purchase, who the contractor is.
My understanding is construction activity in a city is taxable. It goes, a lot of it goes to the state, obviously, as you can see.
Yeah, even our projects.
Yeah, even our projects, but.
Some government purchases that are not taxable, but most
Yeah,
of it is.
there's a limited number, but yeah.
Most of it is, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to hand it over to Drew unless anybody had questions on these sheets here.
I'll take. All right, so property taxes for 2019. You guys, council members, you'll have 2 actions that we have to manage before the end of the year. The first one is council needs to certify an ordinance for regular and excess property taxes to the King County Assessor's Office. This is an ordinance that we typically do every year, and it's pretty standard.
Thank you.
And then in addition to that, council could also pass an increase ordinance that increases the 2018 levied amount, so how much we're collecting currently, by 1% or less. And that's essentially is your policy decision.
So number one is, we're gonna take our money that we're owed?
Yes. Number one is,
Do we wanna take? even
well,
more next
basically, if you, say, approve that second ordinance that I have listed right there, we would then incorporate that into the first ordinance that you see. So the first one is just really standard. The second one is something that we have to have council decide upon before the end of November. In addition to that, we've built in the 1% into our budget for both 19 and 20 as well. So keep in mind that if you make the decision to not increase property taxes by 1%, we will have to take that back out of the budget. So in terms of calculating our share of the property tax, we start with the levy basis, which is how much we're currently levying in this year for 2018. It's basically how much we anticipate to collect that brings into the city that can pay for, say, fire service, police services, parks and recreation, for example, into our general fund. The next thing that we have to calculate is how much is that 1% increase? And that's the policy decision that you council members will have to decide before November 30th. Third calculation that we have to make is the value of new construction. We already have a preliminary amount from the King County Assessor's Office. That's roughly around $60 million that we're going to be adding to the tax rolls in 2019. That dollar amount is then multiplied by the 2018 levy rate, and that's how we bring it onto the rolls for 2019.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
In your last slide,
Yes.
this is a 101 question, but I don't know what excess property taxes means.
We'll kind of get to that a little bit. So when I refer to the excess levy, basically that means that we're paying back the 2002 and now 2016 because we refunded a bond on the fire station. So we're still paying off the fire station that was built back then.
Oh.
And in order to pay for that debt service, we took out an excess levy. So we're collecting property tax that then pays back for that fire station.
Okay.
The final payment for that's 2020.
The final payment is what?
2021.
Okay.
2022.
Okay.
All right, so the fourth item right there is the increase in state utility value. This is essentially transmission lines that are crossing over the city boundaries. If there's any increase in the value, the assessed value of those utilities, we get the benefit of that, and that's multiplied by the 2018 levy rate. And then lastly, any refunds is also included as a part of our total. So in terms of presenting some information, this is all preliminary because the county is still out there. They still have their assessors out there calculating what is the change in the value of new construction and so on. So this is strictly preliminary, but for 2019, you can see that the 1% is equivalent to $78,000, and that we anticipate collecting $152,000 in new construction, which will give us a levy amount, how much we can collect in property tax, that's regular, of $8.02 million. And so that number has been built into the budget. In fact, we're actually taking 98% of that because there are delinquencies throughout the year. Not everyone pays their property taxes on time, for example. So that we're using that as the basis to add to our budget at the moment. And in essence, the difference between the regular levy and for 2018, between 2018 and 2019 is a 2.6% increase in our property tax.
Not an increase to property owners per se, but
Correct.
increase in revenue.
Revenue from.
Yes,
Yeah.
to the city. So in terms of the excess levy, what we had collected for in 2018 was $249,000. In 2019, that's scheduled to drop to $248,000, and that's how much we need in terms of debt service over 2019 to make a down payment on that fire station, or to make a payment on that fire station. And the bond is scheduled to mature December 1st, 2022.
True, approximately what is that cost per thousand right now?
That is close to 7-8 cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation.
7 to 8 cents?
7-8 cents. Sorry, 7 to 8 cents. I don't have the exact figure with me right now, but
But you
yeah.
weren't saying 78 cents?
No,
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah, it's been
My
dropped.
apologies.
Started out around 25, 30 cents.
Yeah. So just to kind of give you some idea of what that 1% is equivalent to and how much a homeowner would have to pay, if you look at the table in front of you, you'll see that you've got an assessed value of a home between $300,000 and $700,000. And so, for example, if you're the homeowner of a $500,000 home, that 1% is essentially equivalent to $11.28
For the year.
for the year, in addition to the property tax that you're paying currently.
Drew, we could probably update that chart with a new starting low number and a new high number.
There are some houses that are worth
Yeah.
300,000 in Snoqualmie, however, the
can't get
average
it.
is about 800.
You can't get a van down by the river for $300,000.
True.
It's wishful thinking, though.
Well, okay, we can certainly do that. That's no problem. All right, so there may be some questions around the change for the entire jurisdiction. So not only are the taxpayers paying property taxes to the city, but there's also some other jurisdictions collecting tax dollars as well, property tax dollars as well. That includes, for example, King County, the Snoqualmie Valley School District. In fact, the state of Washington is collecting property tax for their school fund, and there are some other categories, including other jurisdictions, including the King County Library System, the Port of Seattle, and the King County Flood Control District as well. One of the things to point out is, indeed, we all know our property taxes have gone up between 2017 and 2018 pretty substantially. However, what's important to note is that isn't necessarily a result of the city of Snoqualmie, but it's really a result of the McCleary decision and the property tax swap that they enacted. So to give you some idea of why would it increase here in the city of Snoqualmie between $12.62 to $12.93, it's really because of that state school fund. Councilmember Lissay.
So we know that the McCleary decision had created a whole bunch of excess dollars for schools, and it's really swapping state money for local money. So in 2019, that local money, in theory, is supposed to go away. We know a lot of school districts, especially ours, are talking about raising money again because they didn't do a good job of making sure they were prepared for that. How is that going to affect us in 19 and 20? Potentially, I know it's all speculation and everything else, but potentially, if it were to go away, how does that number, the state school fund number, adjust?
So if the legislature makes any changes to the state school levy, I would assume that,
No, it's a tongue twister.
I mean, it's hard to say what kind of actions that they're going to take.
Not going to go down.
Well, no, that's the thing, is it would go down, right? I mean,
So they're swapping, right? So the Snoqualmie Valley School District that you see up there has actually dropped from $4.91 to $4.76. I think they approved, correct me if I'm wrong, a levy recently.
The full levy.
Right, to make up kind of the difference of what they were expecting to drop as a result of that. I'm assuming that took place at the beginning of 2018, or that went into effect in 2018. So to a certain extent, it is pretty much, I think, locked in for 2019, unless there's some changes.
I think you should probably check that.
They
because
voted in November to go
It
full
was
levy.
November 2017 when they did that, and that was under the expectation that several levies were sunsetting, or several, not, I guess sunsetting is maybe not the right term, but it works for this. And that money was now going to go away. The state is, it was all, local, schools are mostly funded by local money. The state stepped in with McCleary, added state money, and then in that deal that they made with the state money, a lot of local money was supposed to pull back away, so it ended up being a net, I guess, a net increase, but a balancing. But they had that 1 year of overlap.
Statewide, anyway, theoretically.
Yeah.
But
But we had 1 year of
unfortunately, Western
overlap.
Washington picked up the lion's share of funding subsidizing Eastern Washington.
2018 was the year of an overlap, where there was still local money and there was still state money
Right.
was added. And so I'm just curious how that's going to impact in terms of tax dollars coming to Snoqualmie.
All right. I'm going to write a note here and do
Look
some more
into it, but
research.
I just want to,
Okay.
don't want to.
You're anticipating a drop, in other words, Sean might understand that better than most of us, but.
Why?
Well, you kind of kept your ear plugged into that with the
And I'm not
schools
allowed to
foundation.
speak at city council meetings anymore. Or not, I mean, at school board meetings anymore. That gets me in trouble. Speaking here gets me in trouble.
So-
too.
Just an important note, because I didn't see it on the other succeeding slides.
Well,
Just because your levy rate might go from, like Snoqualmie, from 287 to 263 doesn't mean your taxes went down.
Right, I know, but
If your home value went up,
Right.
I'm
you're
bringing
just-
this up as the school board liaison and hearing and speaking with the new superintendent and school board members that they're worried that they're not going to have enough money for 2019. Or they'll be okay 2019, but 2020 is going to be a big drop off.
With the new contract, they're in the, they
So-
know they're in the red in a year and a half.
So that's something that there's going to, how is that, my question is, how does
Yeah.
that translate down to the city?
Okay.
But, and what we have to remember, I know what you're getting at. You're getting at what is, as the citizens that we serve, what are they going to be paying in taxes? Because a lot of times they're not like, oh, well, that's their fault, or they don't break it down in their mind. All they know
Yeah.
is that
A dollar is a
it's
dollar.
all coming out of it, right? And unfortunately, I don't think, while I think we have to be aware of what other tax districts are doing to our citizens, it doesn't necessarily mean we should or should not exercise our ability to keep up by enacting the 1%. I mean, it's nice to be sensitive about it, but just because the school district went for bust doesn't mean that we somehow should like, okay, fine, we
Yeah.
shouldn't take our 1% now.
Well, you have to consider the levels of service that we want to provide as a city, for example. So if you want to maintain police services, fire services, for example, parks and recreation, then that's something that we have to consider when voting upon that 1%.
Yep.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So this is just to give us an appreciation of how the money is divided up.
Correct, yeah.
This doesn't really apply to us doing our budget right now, right?
No, the information that you have around,
You're right.
the table before that I provided tells you how much we anticipate collecting in terms of property tax. That is incorporated into the budget itself. But in terms of the, say, the levy rate that we're providing here or for every other jurisdiction, that really doesn't affect what we do with the budget.
Okay.
All right, so to give you guys, I guess a greater sense of appreciation, if we haven't covered that already in the first slide, we've got another dollar bill chart here. So basically, for every dollar of top property tax that the taxpayers pay, 23 cents of that goes to the city of Snoqualmie, and this is for 2017. 11 cents goes to King County, 39 cents goes to the Snoqualmie Valley School District directly, 16 cents went into the state school fund, and 11 cents went to a number of other jurisdictions. Now, that's for 2017, so when we look at 2018, you can see that for every dollar property tax that a taxpayer paid, instead of 23 cents, 20 cents went to the city of Snoqualmie, 10 cents went to King County, and the Snoqualmie Valley School District received 37 cents, and the big jump, the big increase is now 23 cents is going to the state school fund, and 10 cents is going to those other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I guess the point of my comment is that just that very thing. Is that now, just because the state is funding schools, the money has to come from somewhere. The money comes from our constituents.
Yeah.
The money comes from residents of Snoqualmie, so that's tax dollars they pay. It's just a matter of where it's coming from and how is it then
Allocated.
affecting. And it goes to Sean's comment on, got to pay tax. If we need to increase something to pay for something, there's outside forces that we can't control.
Yeah. True. All right, Robert? To the next slide.
And we're going faster than we thought this evening, so we're going to take just a couple-minute break. Dawn should be here before 6 o'clock.
Is there something we can get to ahead of this, that's past this, and come back to it?
Not tonight. This is all we have for tonight.
Oh, then what are we doing for the next 3 hours?
You don't have to stay here the
I
next 3 hours.
don't see Don talking for 3 hours.
No, he's not.
Drew could talk for 3 hours.
Joe?
we need to talk about getting a fire truck? We could talk for that for 3 hours.
Yeah,
Hey, Dan,
We are.
can you call Don and tell him to, okay.
yeah,
thank
let's
you.
talk about the fire truck.
The chief is working to, hopefully, I mean, it's kind of a long shot, but we are applying for a grant right now through FEMA.
So are we
To
taking a
try to get
recess
funds
then,
for
or-
that ladder
We
truck.
need it, yeah.
And we're trying our best. Some of it's based on needs of the community, and of course, we don't hit a distressed or they're looking for hardships. So that's one challenge to the grant. That's one factor. It's a main factor, though. So we're trying our best.
Gosh, Chief, sorry this extra time's put you on the spot.
Are we recessing or not? Does it have our name on it or Falls Cities?
You'll have
Hope it has our name on it when we're all
Okay.
done. Yeah, that's my goal. Anyway, like Robert said, we were pursuing a Fire Act grant. The Fire Act grant is a federal fire assistance grant that was appropriated earlier this year. It just opened last month and it closes in 2 weeks. We've started putting together all the information that's needed. But like Robert said, this is a challenging application to fill out and somewhat of a long shot for us as a city. When you saw some of those charts regarding reserve funds, there's lots of other cities that don't have those reserve funds in place. So when we apply for a vehicle and for vehicle acquisition and we say this vehicle that we want to replace is 14 years old, and then they ask for how much money we have in reserve, it kind of leads to some questions. And sometimes we've applied 4 times now since 2014 for self-contained breathing apparatus, for staffing. Instead of going for the fire public safety grant, we actually went for, before the public safety levy, we actually went for a grant attempt to get staffing as well for the additional firefighter. And each time our application gets spit out before it even gets to the review panel because of basically the fiscal responsibility within the community in the city.
So we make too much to apply for the scholarship?
Basically.
We have too much in
that's-
reserve, right?
I don't know if that's part of it. It has also to do with the demographic of the community, and then our step. I'll give you an example. We're asking to replace an existing piece of apparatus that's 14 years old with an aerial truck that's going to serve the region. Well, we're going up against agencies that are applying for, hey, we have one fire engine in our firehouse and it's 35 years old and we want to replace it with another one. We're at a huge disadvantage when we're up against
How
those
about we give
groups.
them ours
So we certainly
and we
could.
get their grant money?
So, but yeah, so it's somewhat of a challenge. Where our recommendation, you're going to see it come up during the budget process, would be to start. We're in the process of applying for the grant, and we've done some preliminary investigation. But starting next year, to do more investigation into exactly what we think we need in the community. We have a good sense for it, but actually write a specification or look for another option, and then either later in 19 or even in the beginning of 20, actually pursue it. That's kind of the target we're aiming at.
Okay.
But will we continue to, being a community that's fiscally responsible, will we continue to run into the same problem when you're applying for grants, that we have money in reserve or other circumstances that lead the approvers of those grants to say, yeah, you've got the money, you don't need it?
Yeah, it certainly is a possibility that that's going to happen. I think what we're going to do, or what my recommendation would be to do, is that we pursue the grant, and usually they will let us know mid-year of next year whether or not we're qualified or we're in the running for the final steps of that grant. And if we get that turn down letter, then I think it'll be a conversation for the mayor and finance and for council to decide how they want to pursue this.
How much are we talking in this grant?
The grant, so the grant application in round numbers is right around $600,000 is what we're applying for.
So is it a problem of where we're stashing the money? So what I mean by that is if we have this, when they ask how much you have in reserves, I assume they're probably not talking general fund reserves. They're probably how much do you have in reserves for fire, right? And so if that money is sitting somewhere else, we have earmarked.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was just having that conversation with Drew before the meeting started. The question they ask actually is about emergency funds, rainy day funds, and contingency funds
Oh,
specifically.
so we're hosed.
So, and the challenge that we have as a city fire department is those dollars are used for the entire city, not just the fire department. So when we're up against a fire district who's a, sole purpose junior taxing district, their reserve funds are going to be a lot less. And what we were actually talking about was, is there any way that we could actually look at a proportionate share of those being for the fire department or not? It's really a question for FEMA whether or not we can do that. And we're going to look into that as we move forward with the grant.
Well, that would disadvantage every city applying versus districts.
Yeah, unless you're, Detroit, Flint, Michigan, and those types of things where they're really fiscally hurting as a city and they because of a lot of the different issues.
How much is a truck?
So the range of prices, I talked with a colleague of mine, and they pointed me towards a group cooperative purchasing compact out of Texas that has a list of apparatus. And what we're looking at is in the range between $700,000 and about $850,000 for
Oh,
a
I
new.
thought it was more than that.
Yeah, well, we threw out the number between right around 900 originally. That was before we started looking at it. And that 850, the 700 to 850 does not include tax. It does not include additional equipment that may be needed, like additional complement of ladders and things like that.
So it's over $1 million by the time you add tax and everything else.
It certainly could be, but we're hoping to keep it far below that.
Last time we did a fire truck, by jumping on another agency's, shopping list, because I think people don't understand that you just don't go on and buy a fire truck off a shelf. You buy the chassis and then you customize it for your department.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be kind of a spendy process to go through. It's kind of like designing your own house. And then we jumped on another city that had made an order, and by doing that, we had the economies of scale of being able to cut the cost quite a bit. But then we got in trouble with the state auditor. It was a finding on that one, if you recall.
Yeah.
So in the process you just described, how would we get around that bidding process or the?
So we would need to look into their process, but from what I've heard
Like I
from.
said, the way we did it in the past, I think was smart, because we saved a ton of money
Right.
doing that, but.
And similarly, these group purchasing organizations, the GPOs or the compacts that have been established, they go through all of those efforts to advertise the bid appropriately to state law, advertise it on the website, newspaper, all those things, and they write these RFPs or RFQs for the different types of apparatus. There's probably 15 different types of aerial apparatus that this company has in there that they've already bid out. I talked with a colleague of mine from Washington State they've ordered 2 fire pumpers, the fire engine side of it, from that group, and they ran it by the auditor first, and the auditor indicated that, yes, this does pass muster, because there's been a lot of discussion at the state level related to just that, about group purchasing, about signing on to other RFP processes from other agencies, and some agencies have even gone, I believe, and gotten findings because of the way it was advertised, or the way they signed that interlocal agreement.
So during this budget process, is there any way that we can review the developer fees and maybe set aside some piece of money for the fire truck that's in addition to what we're already doing?
That would be very unusual for a budget process. That would usually be done during a master's plan or development approval process for a particular development.
I have asked a question.
Robert, we can't hear
Microphone.
you.
I have asked about the developer fees, and I was curious myself when the last time we've done a fee study, and I think it's been, stop me if I'm wrong, Mayor, quite a few years
Yeah.
since a comprehensive fee study was done, so we don't even know how we compare to other cities in the region. That would take some time. We could theoretically fund that study in the budget, so we could put forward an enhancement if the
That's a good
council
I
wants to
like
go.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
When-
but it would take a while to implement. It's not going to be an
Okay.
overnight process, of course.
And I would add that, a lot of the developments that are going on right now, the high school, the hotel, the Devco project, the discussion about the Salish, at the end of the day, when those development agreements were written, a portion of that was retained for some sort of fire protection, although it went into a bigger picture, if you will. So it could certainly be debated or argued that a portion of those funds that came from those different developments could be used, whether it's from reserve or something like that, to help fund or offset the cost of a ladder truck. So, and also our plan is, the conversation that we've had thus far is to take our existing piece of apparatus and replace it with the ladder truck, so that there are available funds, or in the ER&R, the equipment replacement fund that's used to replace apparatus, there's some funds already set aside for the replacement of that fire engine. Those could be used to offset some of those costs as well.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Is there time to have a 5-minute break before we jump into the next section, or would that not be appropriate?
I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah, we're just filling time right now anyway, so if everybody's, any other questions on this before we conclude?
Yeah, I got another question.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So in one of our public safety meetings, you mentioned that there might be more opportunities to apply for grants, but you need manpower in order to take the time to write those up.
Correct, yeah. One of the requests that we actually put in as a discussion item was with the mayor, with the budget from the fire department, is setting aside some funds for a grant writer, basically bring them in as a professional services contract with somebody so that we could actually look at some of the other grants that are out there as well and try to pursue those.
Okay.
You touched on it a little bit, but the federal grants, unfortunately, there's less than there used to be. There's less money available. And like Homeland Security a few years ago, they were literally just giving checks to cities. That's not occurring anymore. It's highly competitive now. That's where the needs come into place. But one argument we are going to use for the city in this grant is the fact that we do have some revenue constraints on us. Because we don't have, again, we don't have a lot of brick and mortar businesses on sales tax. So
Okay.
sales tax
That
growth
could be
is-
considered a hardship, right?
Right, and a 1% cap on property tax, and the fact that we're built out at this
Okay.
point. So those are some factors we can use. That being said, we looked at the list of awardees the last 2 years for this grant. There was nobody no jurisdiction on the east side. There were a few in Snoqualmie County and a few in South County and a few in Pierce. But, and there were some high-income cities in California, but again, California's a little different as far as their demographics. But we also, if you look at revenue constraints, one other argument we use, if you're comparing us to different states, is like, you're from California, I'm from California. In California, cities can collect lodging tax directly, and we can't here. And you can imagine, just like collecting tax off gasoline, how our city coffers would look if we collected accommodations tax here. But again, we don't have the ability to do that. So we have some restrictions that other jurisdictions and other states don't have that we're competing against. So that could play in our favor if we write that argument strong enough. No guarantees, of course, with any federal process ever.
All right, with that, we're going to take a 5-minute break and assume that Don will be here at about 6 o'clock. Best to kind of cue it up, and if Don gets here, he can step in.
Okay, this is again just the introduction. I won't go into the details, just with their business plan. Service and scope of operations for the fleet. So fleet is a standalone division under Public Works. It's a customer-centered service organization. They do asset management, including fleet, replacement planning, vehicle specification, writing, coordination of vehicle purchases, new vehicle upfitting, and used vehicle sales. And customer reporting and consulting service to assist customers in lowering their fleet-related costs by identifying unneeded low-use vehicles, charting cost trends, and keeping abreast of changes in the transportation industry. They use software management system to track what they're doing. We actually had extensive discussions to this point with the fleet department. We actually went over vehicle by vehicle, the whole plans for the next 2 to 5 years, actually. We went through everything for every department to come up with the proposals that we will present in the actual, when we get to the budget presentation for Public Works. Service and scope, again, they partner with the Snoqualmie Valley School District for the primary fueling site and secondary commercial retail fuel station network and bulk fuel. Snoqualmie North Bend Police Service is tracked through fuel consumption. The two key systems used to capture the cost of Snoqualmie units working with North Bend or vice versa, so we're making sure we're capturing the costs and charging them directly.
How much lower is I was just over there filling up the Fusion today. What's the price per gallon? How much lower it is than typical? Is it like a 40% discount, 20?
But it would exempt all the excise taxes. So yeah, it's probably about 40 cents.
40 cents lower than a typical retail gas station.
Yes.
Do council members get to fill up there?
So so with the entire fleet, we have a significant savings annually
Discount?
on fuel costs. Councilmember Hall, we got here oh no, I'm sorry, that's.
Brian. Maintenance and repair service, including operation of one city-owned shop, field services for construction, equipment, generation, police and fire, apparatus, and a network of commercial shops for specialized warranty and overflow work. Other maintenance service, including tires and tire balancing, fabrication and welding, city-generated recycling, batteries, oils, coolants, scrap metal, light bulbs, and material management services, including a stock and parts room. There's about 3,190 parts. They do constant inventory, so we make sure what we have out there valued at approximately, of course, that's a floating number, 234,000 right now.
But that's a great slide to illustrate why Don tries to create uniformity in the fleet. In other words, the same types of vehicles across the police fleet or the Public Works fleet. Because the more you have Chevys and Fords and a mix of different types of vehicles, that back office or that back storage room with parts has to get considerably more diversified and more expensive.
Motor pool services include in-house daily car rental program, and this is for, of course, departments, construction equipment vehicle rental pool from various rental companies.
What's the in-house daily rental car program?
It's just the pool. It's just the pool.
We have 4 vehicles here at the City Hall, and there's, it's mostly for admin.
Shared amongst all.
So if accounting uses it, they punch in their code and it's charged to accounting? Is that how it works?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we keep a record. There's a
For
clipboard
HR
in the
or whatever.
car.
There's a clipboard everybody takes when they use the car and just sign out
mileage in,
when the
mileage
mileage.
out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not just that you took the car, but how many miles. So you add up the miles and then do a proportional share of which departments drove that vehicle for how many miles during the year.
Because we have several departments here at the building, of course, we all kind of
Right.
share them. The fleet division is an evergreen fleet certified 3-star, meaning it meets environmental and air quality criteria. And again, the fleet division operates as an internal service fund and charges back costs directly to customer organizations. Rates are set by the overhead costs, hours available per FTE, and labor contracts. 30% markup on parts and 10% markup on fuel for the city's share of pump equipment maintenance at the school district. Vehicles are leased to the customers on a monthly basis with charges based on straight-line depreciation plus an inflation factor surcharge of 3% to cover the future costs of acquiring a replacement unit.
So does each department have like a transportation budget? So
Right. We took all the vehicles away from the departments and effectively made our own internal
Charges.
Hertz rental car department.
Okay.
And in their budgets, you basically rent that vehicle for the entire year, which includes all of its maintenance costs and a payment into a replacement payment cost. It's not a payment paying the vehicle off, it's paying it forward for the, so when the vehicle needs to be replaced, the money's there.
Money's already there, okay.
And that's where we used a lot of one-time revenue years ago, was that the benefit of that was we could just buy out the fleet. Councilmember Mayhew, I'm sorry.
So I wonder, just to help explain this, I'm going to mess with you on the slides. Tell me if you can't do this easily. Can you take us back to, you had, one of your first slides was all the departments.
I think there's one. Like even before fleet?
Yeah.
Yeah, escape out, yeah, there we go.
Can you see anyone?
Well, go ahead there, and I think we'll just, okay, yeah, that one's fine. So when we, can you, actually, you know what, a few forward to expenditures, yeah. So when we look at this, what we don't see anywhere up there is something called facilities. Oh, sorry, fleet, what did you call it? Fleet? Is that the right name? Fleet, there it is, what he said. Notice that isn't there. Okay, and the reason is because what they were just describing is how they take, so they were describing all the costs of that department. They take all those costs and they put it all together, and then when departments use those vehicles, those costs get passed to the departments based on their usage, and they were kind of talking a little bit about how they do that. So the point is, when you're all said and done, that department's sort of zeroes out, because it's incurred all these expenses, but then it's charged them all back to these departments.
I guess I'm still surprised that from an accounting perspective, I'm no GAAP connoisseur, but that you still wouldn't show an expense and then a revenue that, something on the revenue side that shows that it's a revenue center.
So what we, so, is it okay if I answer it? Okay. So what we do is we have several different types of funds at the city. So we have capital and operating, that's two kind of obvious things. Within operating, we have this whole thing called internal service funds. And they all do what you just said. They have all the actual expenses, because they have to manage these expenses. Right. So they have all those departments there. And then the revenue equals the cost, and it zeroes out. So here's the weird thing. The revenues in those departments equal expenses in these departments.
Right.
That's where the money comes from.
So they cancel each other out?
They cancel each other out over in the group called internal service funds.
Gotcha, okay.
But if we look here, which he's showing us, look at the top, general fund. So in the general fund is where all this operating money actually ends up in the end. After the zeroing out, it all ends up here. So what we get is when we look at, for example, 3.3 million fire emergency management, they're telling us that includes all the fleet costs. So they're actually telling us this is in fact the total you spent to do fire and emergency management, including their vehicles. Make sense? So that's why it gets really important for us to understand, well, how much expense is in there, because they're going to have to recharge that back out to these departments that use this stuff. So if their expenses are really high, then in the general fund, these budgets all go to heck, right? If they can keep those costs low, then that benefits all these budgets. So that's kind of how the whole thing works.
The portion of their individual department budgets that goes to that becomes smaller, which means their overall budget can be smaller.
Exactly. Okay. Now, the mayor just touched on one last thing you have to understand that also goes on in that fund, which is that
equipment replacement.
that fund, the equipment fund. I keep thinking facilities, which it's not. The equipment fund has a fund balance. And the mayor was just explaining the reason it has a fund balance is because when they charge out the cost of those vehicles, they're charging the cost, a proportional cost of what it'll take to replace that vehicle. So by the time the vehicle's used up, let's say they think it'll go 150,000 miles. By the time it's got 150,000 miles on it, they will have charged out the departments enough money, and they'll have it sitting there to buy the replacement.
Do we have this described somewhere in a document that we can refer to?
So I'm not aware of the city having that described, but what I'm describing to you is what we call just governmental fund accounting. So there's just a massive set of accounting rules that set all this up, and it's kind of all cities use it.
But don't some cities do things slightly differently than other cities? And
Well, yeah, so for example, I'm not sure we're getting that. For example, some cities didn't do, so the mayor described how this fund originated. So way back there was a day one where all the vehicles had to get purchased, right? Where'd that money come from? Some cities didn't have a source for that. So they leased their vehicles. So literally Avis actually owns the vehicles. So for those cities, what's happening is,
They lease it from an external agency and pay the bill.
that's why I said
Yeah.
literally Avis. I think Avis is actually a provider, am I right, Robert? Mr. Ramoon? Does Avis actually provide these kind of vehicles to cities?
Yeah, United Rentals.
Yeah, so a whole bunch of them. So the point is that then what happens is you're paying an outside company because they put the money up front for your vehicle, which means, guess what? It costs you more because they got a profit element. So what's happened here is incredible. One of the many very responsible things that have happened in the city in the past that leads to, things like having those strong reserves. But what's happened is that most if not all of our vehicles are self-funded. So, and now we've got this revolving fund where we sort of charge out the departments so we can replace them when it comes due, and this thing just gets to go on, and that's how it works. And we're not having to pay some outside company a percentage of that.
So we had a one-time thing where you had to decide, okay, we got to suck it up. And there were reserves or whatever that you took from, so we're going to buy all these vehicles now.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, we're never going to have to come up with that money again because it's going to accrue as they're used.
Right.
So there was a painful moment in time where you had to come up with, to do all that cash up front.
It wasn't that terribly painful. What it was, it just required some discipline from the council because, the city had gotten into a habit in prior years of using a lot of those one-time revenues on ongoing operational. As the city was growing, it was building ongoing operational growth on one-time revenues with the idea that, that growth is a long way coming before it'll stop. And Bob remembers, he's smiling over there, we were saying, well, in municipal time, 10 years or so isn't a long time. That'll be on you before you know it. And when you got to close the gap, when you got to start weaning that operational budget off those one-time revenues and then close that gap, every year you wait, that's going to get real painful. So if we started 10 years out and started weaning off of that, then it would be not so painful to gradually move into that sustainable picture. So I really credit the council for being disciplined to not grab that one-time cash and start buying all kinds of goodies. And then the question was, well, what do you do with it? And the really wise investment was to say, well, let's buy out the fleet program. And because every time any city tries to do a fleet program, when you put all the fully loaded operational costs on top of replacement costs, plus payment cost, that's the third piece that breaks the pencil, and you just can't get there. It's just too much of a burden on departments to put all three of those. We could remove the one by taking all that one-time revenue we had and just start plowing it into buying out the fleet over a couple, 2-3 years. In fact, I don't know if we ever got to 100%. That was one of my questions, because did we ever get to where we've completely bought the fleet out essentially, and then now we're in a forward posture. Yeah.
And then you guys, it was so flush, you took a little.
Oh, that's true. We rolled it back a bit. Okay, thank you for reminding me, Dan.
I didn't forget that.
Yeah, so to Jim's point, we're not paying interest and other loaded costs from an external agency.
Yeah.
We can do that more efficiently in-house, and then all that money goes forward. And then when the city's back into where the one-time revenues aren't there and we're lean like other cities, you're using the same amount of cash as they do, but it's paying forward rather than backward. Councilor
Yes, I
Ramey?
was going to say, you heard Mr. Hammoud say a little bit earlier that he has a schedule that this department maintains and that they review. I take it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, so there's a schedule of every vehicle we have. And they schedule out when they expect that to get replaced, and they're constantly monitoring those recharge rates to these departments so that that money will accumulate to replace those vehicles by the time they have to be replaced. And
Including lawnmowers and other pieces of equipment. It looks very much like a capital improvement plan where it's just got everything listed and then years going out, 10 years or so, and doing the estimated lifetime of those pieces of equipment or vehicles and with those replacement cycles.
And is it, do you periodically go over that? I assume you periodically go over that with Parks and Public Works Committee?
We want to go, I don't know what the routine was before, but we certainly want to get on a regular routine with that. So that's something that definitely is on our list. If not quarterly, maybe twice a year at least.
Yeah, in the last biennium cycle, Drew went through that pretty thoroughly and made recommendations for maybe that we had funded too much. Councilmember Shepherd?
So in addition to the fleet being a piece of of these pieces of pie, we also have administration that goes back to these pieces of pie as well, right? As far as the total, some of the costs of administration. I mean, it gets pretty complicated after a while.
Well, no, that's exactly what they're talking about. So, for example, in the past, each department, the practice was usually roll out one of the old police or fire vehicles, and then that would go to planning and parks or the parks department or one of the general fund departments. That didn't matter if it had 80,000 miles on it. We even consolidated that more efficiently to say, why does each department have their own vehicle? We'll just do pool vehicles, and that's why they note the times, and then they allocate to each one.
Well, as I'm
Because the allocations and charges are going to go to general fund or utility fund. Dan might drive the Fusions, 10% of the time, and it'll be charged to enterprise funds for that pool vehicle. And I don't know if that was your question.
No, I'm not talking about fleet. I was talking about just generally, there's some things that we're looking at here, like when we go through this budget process, which I've never done before, when we talk about fire and emergency management and we're talking about budgeting, does that include or not include fleet? Does it include or not include?
It includes fleet.
Yeah.
It includes fleet.
So sometimes, like, for instance, we'll have an individual that will be showing up when we do the warrants under a variety of department codes. And I'm just curious, we have some people who, part of them are paid for from a variety of department budgets.
Yes, so we're doing.
So it gets to be kind of a spider web, if you
We
will.
do our best to
Yeah.
track, so we have like clipboards in each car, and we're trying to say, if you're on business for streets, then write down the streets. If you're on business for, say you work in the executive office upstairs,
Yeah.
but you're in a different, you're working,
So-
doing something for administrative services, then they write down administrative
Yeah,
services.
I'm not talking cars at all. I'm just talking about other expenses that are administration, that are actually showing up under other budgets, if you will. as
So
far
like,
as-
is HR,
HR
is
one.
his salary divvied up amongst various departments? Or do we have salaries like that, or?
Yeah, we have done that with,
Okay.
like Bob's salary is divvied up. There's a portion that
Right.
enterprise funds pays for Bob's
It's a
salary, even my
spider web of
salary
Stuff.
and
My
Robert's and so forth.
salary
Is that
is
what you were getting at, Peggy?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, there's all kinds
Th-
of.
Those are mechanisms that all
Charges.
cities started to use. Every tool like that, once the 1% cap was put into place, you saw costs start shifting more to, all the real costs of enterprise started, every allocation you could, which legally could, would shift that way.
So we're not ever going to see a fleet expense on a pie chart, right? Because the fleet expense is built into each department's budget for what they'll use the fleet for, correct?
It's an internal service fund.
Right. So we're not going to see it on this pie chart.
Because it's charged out again to.
And therefore,
by use.
do we as council not need to budget for that? Because that budget is baked into each department?
It's still, because it's a standalone fund, at least the way we interpret the
Okay.
RCWs and the city ordinance. that
Which is
you
why
still
we have to
pass it.
approve
Correct.
the ultimate purchase of it. Even if you've saved for it, we still have to approve it because it's got to come out of this fund that is, okay.
Jim?
Yeah, so just to try and be helpful, so I think, Mr. Hume, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that what he's trying to answer your most recent question is, so remember I said there's these internal service funds over here, and then they recharge over here to the general fund. He will take us through the general fund budgeting, but he will also take us through the internal service fund budgeting, is that correct?
Yeah, so you're going to have a.
So you
a
will
presentation
actually
on the
see
actual-
both.
Gotcha, okay.
But the thing that you'll have to remember when internal service funds get talked about is we'll be making sure they're not overspending. They'll say, this is how much we're going to spend and this is why, and we'll end up approving that. That gets recharged through. So that, in his budget, when he put it together, he has to track all that through. So that's, the budget that he's presenting over there on internal service fund already assumes that that then gets charged through to here, so all the numbers are built that way. And so if something gets changed over there, he'll push it back through to the general fund. Does that make sense? Yep. But, and he'll also talk to us about the fund balance and the big list of vehicles and why he's satisfied that that fund balance is not too little, not too much, about right. Yeah. And then the other thing is, there are different ways. So one of the huge, perhaps the biggest challenge in accounting is trying to figure out how to allocate costs. This is our accountants use that term, allocate costs.
Right.
And we have a lot of different methods to do that. And so at the city here, we use, as does every organization, use multiple methods. So when you have a big, giant cost, like the cost of running a fleet, you run an internal service fund. We have some administrative departments that are run that same way, and they get charged out. For things that are not such a big, giant cost, they're more of a smaller cost, we'll actually just take the cost and split it and charge it to multiple departments just directly. So I think that's the thing that you may be seeing, where you've seen that happening. That's a different process than the internal service fund, and it's usually for a smaller cost. Rather than pile it all up and do this big recharge thing, they just directly allocate the invoice.
Now, to that point, though, it is, it ends up being a pretty significant cost as far as the allocations of administration that we are allocating, we're actually charging back to the general fund. So say my time. Say my time is, what did we change it to, like, how much general fund?
So 30% general fund.
Yeah, so we just reevaluated all the allocations citywide, and we have made some changes from previous years. So for example, if my time is spent, say, 70% on the bond or the utilities, that's not general fund time. So we're going to charge, but I'm housed in the general fund. So my home is the general fund, so to speak, just like Bob Larson's is. But if we're spending, and Drew's spending, say he's spending 75% of his time working on public works and utilities. So, but his position is housed in the general fund. We're going to charge them 75% of his time, and that's embedded in the cost allocation plan for administration. And we actually have a line item that goes back to administration for that. Now, that's for the general fund. Now we have separate special revenue, special internal service funds, facilities, fleet, IT, and pretty much for the building. And so those funds are separate. And risk management as well.
Yeah, but to some degree, we're trying, that's a good segue to a point I wanted to make, was that same philosophy with the fleet, where we're trying to get in a forward posture, sort of paying it forward for replacement cycles. We're trying as best we can to apply those same principles to facilities and equipment, IT, and, like we did with the parks equipment, where $300,000 a year is allocated to just constantly keep out ahead of the maintenance on that. It certainly makes the council's job profoundly easier too, because then you're just reviewing and making tweaks and adjustments and tune-ups versus what happened in years past. Suddenly the police department would come forward and request 5 new police vehicles, and we'd kind of be going, we didn't make a plan for that. Where are we going to get, the $500,000 to suddenly fund that, or the $250,000? And it was a bit of a crisis. So it's really helps things run a lot more smoothly.
Now, when you have an unusually, large ticket item like the ladder truck, for example, we sat down with Don about this last week, and we decided that if you tried to allocate that out, obviously it would charge fire quite a bit more. So it's going to actually, because fire's in the general fund, it's going to charge the general fund more. Is that worth it, or is that more of a standalone type of a capital purchase because it's a one-time? It's, what is it, 25 years you said to replace? 20 year, yeah. So 20-year replacement schedule, so it doesn't kind of follow your normal fleet. And because it's such a high ticket item, we're not counting that as part of the allocation. That's going to be separate. So anything like that. And some cities, they'll get a loan for their fleet, and they'll pay it from just straight out debt service. Sometimes in the general fund, they won't allocate it out. There are leases out there where cities will lease purchase high dollar items. So some cities do it differently.
So since Don's here, should we stop filling time?
Yeah, no, this is all good stuff that's still
I
relevant to what
don't
Don's
question
done.
that.
He knows this is directly relevant to what he does. I'm sure you're enjoying this. The one caveat I would put on the fire truck comments that Robert just made, correct me if I'm wrong here, Robert, is that it isn't that we didn't anticipate the need for a ladder truck eventually or a replacement truck. It would be the thing that would be treated different is the delta between what money was in there for a replacement fire truck vehicle and the cost of a ladder truck. So if you got $500,000 for a regular fire truck per se, and a ladder truck costs $750,000, the delta's $250,000, and that's where we would look. But once the ladder truck is in the fleet program, we really should be then adjusting that fleet program to anticipate whether it's a 15 or 20-year replacement cycle to have that piece of equipment in that overall fleet schedule. All right, Don.
So I agree with what you just said, Mayor, but Mr. Hamoud, do you agree with that? As far as? That the ladder truck, when purchased,
Would
will-
not be 100% outside of the fleet program. That it would be the delta between what's in the fleet program for a replacement fire truck and a ladder truck.
Assuming that it's replacing a fire truck.
It's replacing a current engine right now. What Mayor's talking about is the delta between the two, but there's going to be a cost difference in that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I understand that. My question is actually about, so going forward.
Oh, the comment I made about once it's in the fleet program, we would not.
Yes, and I
Okay.
just thought I'd heard something different from Mr. Mahmood, so I just wanted to clarify. Because, so once that's purchased, that'll be 20 years till the next one, but during that 20 years, we'll be accumulating funds for it. That'll be accumulating in the ISF, right, in the Internal Service Fund?
We are actually looking at that. This is more, again, in the weeds for me, but just so the council knows, and I don't want to talk too much about it, we have a fire equipment replacement fund. So I'm trying to see is, should it be in the internal service fund or should it be just in that fund?
Okay, yeah, so I didn't mean to take you too much into details. The only point I just wanted to make is,
But yes,
I
we're
would
still gonna
caution
recover.
against having that money accumulate in general funds and encourage you to think about it either in ISF or a capital fund, somewhere that's, where it won't be mistaken for an available.
And that's one.
Reserve.
Fine, yeah.
Okay, talking in code, what's ISF?
Internal Services Fund.
Okay, thanks.
Sounds way more interesting than that if you go with the acronym. I'd stick with ISF. All right, Don,
Don, we're going to give it back to you.
We're on there.
you have till 6:45?
I hope we didn't
But we have
interrupt
three,
you.
No, I'm not a talker.
with 3 minutes of questions, that is.
Yes, okay.
The bad news is we interrupted your dinner, but the good news is you get to go home
Actually, I was in
earlier.
the shower when Nick showed up, so.
Oh, good. You're nice and clean.
That's all right.
TMI.
Yeah.
And you,
Can't unsee that.
use the handheld microphone, because that one's not really. picked up.
Okay. So as you see in this slide here, most of our equipment is miscellaneous small, handheld something. In our facility, facility one is what we call it. In our, it's mainly the stuff that's over $1,000 or $1,500 in that range goes into the management part of the ER&R system. Of course, it's broke down, police, fire.
Oldest vehicle, 42 years old.
You got 49 equipment classes, 60 makes, 96 models. We insource police services, North Bend. See, our average is 8.21 in the years, how old we are. The oldest is actually 43 now, and the newest is the prisoner van that we just bought for the police department, so it's about 6 months old. Our average miles driven, mainly that's police, tallies up most of those miles. 8.5 is our overall miles per gallon, and our highest miles per gallon is vehicle number 2, which is our Fusion out here. It's 39.2 miles per gallon, so.
Does better than the Prius.
That was the fire truck.
Our PMs are on a schedule of 3,000 or 500 hours or 6 months.
TMs are what?
Preventative maintenance
Okay.
schedule. These are set up in our software program when the asset's actually entered into our software. So when it reaches any or all of those, it is triggered automatically onto a sheet that's printed once a month. We close our books once a month out there, typically around the 15th. We get a fuel bill from the school district, which the prior slides you see we share with, that's our primary fueling site. We use the town pump over here, or the actual 76 station in the middle of town for backup whenever the school district is out of service, or in an emergency if they're out for whatever reason, out of fuel or whatever, we use the 76 as a backup. So our internal repairs are either emailed, it's on a help desk ticket. Basically, it's an internal email that's internal for right now only. It's not, it doesn't go to the outside public. It's for repairs in between preventative maintenance. Taillights, things that burn out, just breakdown type stuff. And the requests are they're prioritized as they come in. If it's police vehicle or fire truck, or mainly it's put into a worst to better scenario type thing. So they're fixed in order or how we feel as if they should be done. So as you know, there's 3 departments that share the same facility in the motor pool down here at City Hall. That's broke out. We do have a motor pool checkout sheet that actually is rented or actually checked out. So reports can be pulled, and each department can be billed percentages at the end of the year. I know you guys were talking about splitting that, dividing it up. It's actually through a report that we can generate that actually breaks that into different divisions. So it's mainly just in this building, but at times Public Works out and police sometimes use the motor pool cars also. So we have 21 units in police, 24-hour operation, 7 days a week. Again, we insource North Bend in this. The outfitting, warranty, all the radio installs go to a specialty shop up here in North Bend right now. Company Financial Consultants Institute up in North Bend, FCI. We got 6
Are those
total-
motorcycles dirt bikes?
Yes, they are. They're actually
for
dirt
trails.
bikes.
There's a quad
There's
in
actually,
there.
we're down, this slide's a little bit old. We're down to now 1 armored vehicle.
You should have a quad in there somewhere, right?
No, that's under the support units. Yeah. Basically, yeah. It's not a quad, but it's an actual side-by-side RZR.
Oh,
It's under
okay.
the support units.
And parking of that police vehicle on the curb would probably be a maintenance issue over time.
Oh, it's probably the police chief. No, that's not his car. Never mind.
Anyway, so we do a lot of the specialized stuff.
Can I ask you a question about the armored vehicles? Is that vehicle shared with other cities?
Actually, that would be a small agency question for Nick or Perry.
Just yell.
Yes, we did have 2. We just recently returned 1 back to the military. It was a smaller peacekeeper type, and we still have the big, what they call Cayman, and that is shared with the coalition of 11 police small agencies.
It's one of our contributions to the coalition. Other agencies provide other sort of equipment and specialties as part of that, do they?
Right. We house it, but they have access to it. Typically, it's used in parades and so forth. But it was used not too long ago by State Patrol on I-90, where it was utilized to make an approach of the vehicle in which there was a subject in the vehicle that had a firearm, and they wanted to safely approach the vehicle to see if he had, if he was okay or danger, and turned out he had taken his own life. But they did use that to effectively and safely approach the vehicle. So it is used in officer safety type issues as well.
So I was curious about whether we allocate costs, and you're saying that in the coalition,
We incur
we'll
the maintenance
contribute
cost of that.
something, huh?
We incur the maintenance cost of that.
Okay.
Yeah, we acquired it from the military for virtually free. But the idea, or Chief, if you could hang on for 1 second. I mean, yes, we incur the maintenance costs on that, and other agencies get to avail themselves of use without compensating us.
True.
But they have other equipment and specialties and resources that we get to tap into in exchange, so it's not a direct.
Right, that's part of the coalition, is that we are able to pull our resources together as small agencies, because typically as a small agency, you don't have a lot of the resources like, say, Seattle or Bellevue has. So if we pull all our resources together, then we have more options to deal with an issue if we need. We can just reach out to them, and our part is the Cayman.
Okay.
All right, so that one, you got the armored vehicle you got rid of, Don, was the first one we acquired like a decade ago. We still had, we still had that. Huh? Okay.
1973 or 74.
Yeah, okay.
Dodge chassis, they called it the Peacekeeper.
Right.
They just recently took it back to Fort Lewis, and
Right.
so.
Blew it up.
Yeah, to talk a little bit about that, the Cayman is not in the ER&R system. We do not occur any type of payments or anything for replacement of that vehicle. So if the police need something done on the vehicle.
Don, if you could hold the microphone.
Sorry. Again, it's either written up, either through our help desk ticket or through an email or calling or sending us a work order saying batteries are dead or, flat tire or whatever. So those costs are actually paid for directly out of, if there's any cost involved in parts ordering or purchasing of parts, it's purchased through a line item through the police department.
Okay.
So our fire department, 6 total units, 2 fire trucks, 2 aides, 2 support, and that's also 24-hour, 7 days a week. Due to the recent accreditation requirements, we now send all the units down to Eastside Fire and Rescue Shop because they have a emergency vehicle type training, special training certificates that the accreditation looks for. We originally had the 2 fire trucks that were going down there for specialty purposes for pump testing. They were going down there for once a year. They have a pump skid down there that they would test these things. And while they were down there, we would have them do the annual service on the fire trucks. Well, it's just kind of, now that we've got the accreditation, that's moved towards just servicing everything down there so everything's consistent. And so the same thing is if there's a write-up on those, typically they write up the shop at Eastside Fire and Rescue. They CC myself or Kevin, the mechanic out here, and the work's done down there.
Good.
Invoicing and everything still comes through us. We still collect for, still do all the management of all the dollar amounts, fueling, costs, parts, all that kind of stuff.
Has cost changed since you had to go through Eastside Fire and Rescue to repair the vehicles?
The cost hasn't, again, we've just started that at the beginning of this year, so we're still kind of young and figuring out if it's cost effective. But again, it's an accreditation. It's more of accreditation than it is actually having them doing the work. It does help us out because it frees up some time for us to do other things, but.
Don, is that, I think one of our goals eventually was, we've had exploratory conversations, with the school district, because we have land over there to expand or build additional public works facilities that we need to maintain fleet and whatnot as that's grown. The school district has similar needs with a bus barn and maybe even relocating that. So we think there's a great synergy to be achieved there. But one of the benefits would be that we could finally have facilities to be able to service the fire trucks in-house. I guess the question I have of you is, do you see Eastside Fire and Rescue probably still having the edge on that because they economies of scale with all the fire trucks that they service, just the material they have, the supplies and all that?
Yes, because that's the nature of what they do. That's their bread and butter. You hit on the school buses in the school district over there. Because they have their pupil transportation and we haul dirt, gravel, and whatever else, their payload's a lot different than what we work on. So that match really isn't the greatest fit working on buses and public works. The better fit would be more centered towards North Bend Public Works, because then we could free up, they own a sweeper, we own a sweeper. It's more what we do, what we work on. The school district, yeah, it's a great idea, but it's because of what they.
But limited partnership there is what you're saying. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Can I expand on that? So we updated the interlocal agreement. It actually came to council and you all voted on it, or it happened late last year, I believe, is when it changed. And that document hadn't been updated in 6 or 8 years, so there was a slight increase in cost. Regarding the mayor's question.
I'm sorry, interlocal with what agency?
Eastside Fire and Rescue to do our apparatus maintenance. And the reason why is it has to do with a certification requirement that their mechanics have. And with that being said, and first of all, I think the fire trucks get maintained once a year or twice a year? Twice a year, and the aid cars are 3 times a year. So it's not, from my perspective, I'd rely on Donovan. It's not a huge, workload piece that's shifted off. But that being said, from a best practice standpoint with our accreditation, like Don alluded to, if the city staff were to get EVT certified, there's nothing stopping us from bringing that work back here if they have the capacity to do it. So,
but it sounds like it might be cost prohibitive compared to partnering with Eastside Fire and Rescue because, again, the more economies of scale.
Again, they do pump testing for us, which we do not have that capability doing that out here. So the fire trucks are already going to go down there at least once
Yeah.
to get that annual.
Right, in other words, for the frequency of our needs, it's a pretty heavy capital investment to try to have the facilities to do all that. And it would be-
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just here, they're actually using a mobile test pump pit now where it comes on a trailer and they do it right behind the fire station. So that's something Don wasn't aware of. It just started it.
All right.
Okay.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So I noticed on some of the warrants I'm looking at that we are spending money on a contractor to do street sweeping because we have a street sweeper that's damaged or broken.
Yes.
Is
That's
there a
correct.
reason why we can't fix it?
It is actually at the shop right now being fixed. It was called on yesterday, should be delivered back here by Monday, but the part that was damaged was a body part in the back that they had to actually physically go to the factory and make. So that's
Because it was
the
out of
holdup.
service for quite a while.
It's out of, it was out of service for quite some time.
It was
It's
an
2
insurance
to 3
claim.
months, and plus it was an
Oh.
insurance
I
claim.
collected
So
money on it already.
So I thought in talking with Dan or somebody else that we were not going to resurrect that thing, or at least not purchase a new one and look at the gentleman who does this, offers the street sweeping service out of North Bend. That's not the direction we're going?
that is,
We're gonna go out to bid.
Dan, if you get the microphone.
Sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to make you, I didn't mean to wake you up. Sorry about that.
We're analyzing, working with Eric Kaltenbacher, and he's looking at our current services with what we use with the sweeper, and then versus going out to bid. So it wouldn't be, it may be North Bend, whoever it is, the lowest bid is what we
Right,
would do.
okay.
So would they bring their own equipment or would they use our equipment?
No, it's completely farmed out. Their own equipment, their costs, their maintenance.
So would we, this street sweeper, would this be an extra piece of equipment then, or?
So
we'd sell it on our government surplus auction site, or some, go outright and sell it through a different.
Just put it on the corner up where they sell the fruit and the cherries up there.
So how much would we sell it for, do you think?
Typically, when we set them up in the system, if they're completely through our system, they're paid off and they're reached their life, it's 10% of what we purchased before. Basically what we take off the surplus. If it's something that's newer.
All right, let's,
Use that one.
why don't we let you continue down and kind of focus on the higher level stuff? We're probably all getting
Okay.
into the weeds a little too much, sorry.
Anyway, so it would be, what we do is we would go online and compare what the year, make, model of that. We'd also go to different vendors and ask them what a typical cost that would be, and then we would surplus it at that
I'm
amount.
just thinking, could we apply it towards a fire truck, a ladder truck?
Right.
It's a possibility, yeah. You
That
can.
would buy us one rung of the ladder, right?
Yeah, it would buy the tires or something.
Okay, anyway, so,
It's not, it's not typically a zero-sum game, but we'll,
Yeah.
go ahead, Don.
all right. So our street department has 31 units. This is where we house all of our snowplow equipment. We have 13 CDL drivers as of today. There's 2 of these that actually, that require, actually 3, the sweeper's also one, that require a CDL driver's license. So that's one of the big issues we have as far as staffing, is to get personnel out to plow our streets and help us plow during these events. So water department's got 39 units. We got generators, typically that power all the pump stations, lift stations.
Are those just the mobile gen sets?
No, these are actually inside the buildings,
Okay.
in the neighborhoods.
But you put those in the fleet
There's-
program then, huh?
Yes, they're all in the fleet program. We decided to do that back in 2005 because it was an internal combustion engine. It just fit of what we did. So instead of having somebody in a different division servicing them and trying to allocate the money, we've already had a couple of these come back and take a lot of work. There's one down at the end of the Snoqualmie here in the lift station 1, they call it, that's actually had a lot of work done to it. And because of being in this, we're able to have the funding to repair it and rebuild it without having to go and spend a lot of maintenance money out of a different line item. So Fleet Facility Division has 7 total units. We have 3 trucks, 1 forklift, a couple of miscellaneous small backpack blowers and whatnot, and an emergency generator that we just put out at the Public Works shop to power that facility. Building department has 2 units, typically just for going out permits. City Hall has motor pools, like we talked before, 4 total units. 2 units are automotive hybrid. One's the SUV hybrid, the small Escape, and then on top of the roof we have 1 emergency generator. Again, it's also used for IT's contract in Duval. They use one of these cars to transport back and forth down there. Parks Department has 72 total units, 10 light trucks, 13 constructions, and then miscellaneous. They have a lot of miscellaneous equipment. That's where in that pie or that chart, this is where most of that comes from.
That's weed whackers, edgers,
Anything
everything.
that's, like I said, 1,000, 1,500, and above that, below that, we just buy it out of the line items, or let the departments buy it out of line items. We don't want to worry about managing that small piece of equipment, try to collect that small amount of money. So our fleet staff, that's our total FTEs, 2.3. They split me in half. I'm half fleet, half facilities. I got 1 mechanic and 1 that's 50-50, they call him. It's Ryan Barnett. He's paid out of half of facilities and half of fleet. So he mainly does a lot of work up at the police station. But if we need him, we use him in the fleet shop for multiple things. And the 0.3% is the management overhead. Our ratio is 33-1, or 133-1, sorry. It means that we got 133 pieces of equipment for every FTE that we have. And our average annual work order tasks are 1,728. That means work tasks, so.
Of that, Don, of that 2.3 total FTE number at the top, how much of that is just fleet? Because it sounds like you got some facility FTE.
Well,
mixed in.
that's the total.
gleaned
Half
out-
of the 50 is paid out of facility, and
Right,
the
so
other
you
half.
gleaned out the facilities on that total at the top.
No, that's 2.3. It's myself, half of myself, half of Kevin.
Right, so I'm raising the
Okay,
question because the
sorry.
title at the top of the slide is fleet staff. That should be fleet and facility staff.
No, that's fleet staff,
Okay, just fleet.
yes.
All right.
And it would be the same as that on the facility side. Because you have
2.3,
Ken, myself, and
okay.
the other 50 guys.
Gotcha, okay.
And then the management, so.
Where's Phil's truck fall into? Is that parks?
Phil would be in parks, yep.
Okay.
Our additional duties is the logistical seat in the EOC, Emergency Operation Center, over at the fire station with Mark. We are in charge over there of all the resources, equipment, when we have a natural disaster, anything. We have a seat over there along with Dan and Brian Krause. And any other major snow and ice removal event that we have. Typically, we're the first ones out because we have to put the equipment a lot of our equipment's shared, so we have to either keep one available for the daily operations, and when we leave or go home, either have one set up or set one up before we go home. So typically, we don't have one just assigned for snow plow all the time, 24 hours a day. So we also do the recycling. Over here, once a year, we do the recycling event that just happened here the 15th of September. We also are involved in all the railroad days, block parties, fun runs, all that kind of stuff. We're also in charge with risk management. Big part of that, taking pictures, getting documents, estimates, and kind of stuff. So again, just like the mayor was talking about, the facilities division's the other part of it. And our 4 major properties are police, fire, public works, city hall, and the old library. The other stuff, we still have it on records, we still have it inventoried, but that's our main main focus for facilities. So in conclusion, we keep our city fleet moving. We take pride in what we do. Been here 21 years. Prior to this, I worked in different construction, worked on school buses for 6 or 8 years. So very proud of what I do. I'm very passionate. I care, and hopefully that this slide makes sense.
Hey, Don, first of all, I sense that you guys do, especially compared to a neighboring city, you do a fantastic job of clearing the streets of snow here. I remember 2 years ago, the first day of track practice on February 28th, it snowed 6 inches and they had school the next day. That doesn't happen without you guys doing your job.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's everybody in Public Works that has, just Dan's guys.
Well, I didn't want to give Dan too much credit because you know how that goes. It's the Coogan. But
Yeah.
my question, though, was I know you guys have, for the kind of the regular snows, you guys seem to have enough in-house to do. Do you have a budget line item to, I guess, purchase the services of county or backup for major snowfall events? Because I know I've seen county or non-Snoqualmie trucks come through here on the major events.
There used to be an interlocal agreement. I think they used to do the primary roads, intersections, they used to de-ice with liquid on the bridges, especially on 202. But I think currently.
No, we have done that. We're very fortunate to have a city administrator that's a Minnesota boy, used to winters and snow, so.
So he snowballs it himself?
No, so he just knows how to utilize all that, and he's on it, Johnny, on the spot. Bob has been like way out ahead, just knowing intuitively when to reach out to ISCO or other agencies and get trucks out here.
There
A lot of
was a
times
time-
ISCO might have a half inch of dusting
Okay.
snow. While we
But
got
that's
6
that's
inches
just
now.
does that just come out of like a contingency or a sort of an emergency fund, or is it something you budget for?
It usually comes out of like an emergency fund if
Okay.
if we don't have a contingency built
What you
in.
mentioned about Issaquah, well, about 2 or 3 years ago, we had an event that we needed them.
Yeah, a few
And
other
they
trucks.
came out, and they're 2 guys, 2 trucks, and I think it was just invoiced, and we took it out of the line item for an emergency.
And are we responsible for paying for 202? I know we plow it. I think we do. Are we responsible for just that's part of?
I think just because it's a part of our inner stuff, we take care of signs and lights and,
Dan, do you remember what that was built to when we did that?
We do the first ones there take care of it because it's primarily our residents, visitors that'll use it.
Okay.
DOT typically takes care of the pavement. We're outside of the pavement. So that's how it works. I'm sorry, what was your
In the
question?
years that we have had agencies like Issaquah come out with plows, where have we built, how's that been paid for? Where do we
That
build?
just comes out of the reserve fund. And we have interlocal
Emergency
agreements
reserves?
with this.
Emergency reserves, what reserve? fund?
Emergency reserve fund.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, and that's part of the rationale for trying to look at getting some multi-purpose trucks or trucks you could throw a plow in the front, correct?
yes.
So we have more,
The availability,
Versatility, yeah.
that versatility and more staffing availability due to CDLs.
yeah, I'm
the
not trying to
license.
make a poke at the 3/4 ton truck a bit, but that's part of the rationale is to be able to throw a plow in some of
That's
those
what, yeah,
trucks.
and that's, a lot of it is, again, you've seen it, we've got, 2 staff members. So when the equipment is not ready to go, or if it's a surprise event, typically it's, basically like tonight, come get me out of my house and bring me down there and let's get the plows on and stuff like that. Typically, it's not something that everybody can do. We don't want somebody that's not trained to put the plows on there going out and getting in an accident because they didn't put it on correctly, or it's just they damage it putting it on, or things like that. So we typically put one truck that's ready out there, but most of the time, one isn't going to be enough. It gets it going, gets it started. You get out there and make sure that the cars aren't going off the pavement with that one while we're over there, getting everything behind the scenes ready to go. So
And not just damage the truck, damage the curbs, damage the
everything,
cars,
yeah,
everything
pretty
else
much,
out there,
yeah. So
So what you're saying is Dan doesn't put them on or drive them?
we hope not. No.
One, on that issue, there has been a need for, one of the problems we had in the past was like our sand piles would freeze up or
Yes.
turn into a big block of ice. Can you speak
Yes,
to some of those?
we do have covers out there now for our product. They're tarp, they're dome tarps. You see them down Highway 18 alongside sit on top of ecology blocks. There's material that's in there. The liquid stuff, of course, it's in a tank. It doesn't freeze, so.
But you're saying
Better
Dan
sand.
can use an ice pick to break up the
He's
sand
out
if
there
he needs to.
stepping on it while we're out, doing
Okay.
what we're doing, so. Holding an umbrella over the top of it.
Councilmember Mayhew, you had questions?
Nah.
Any other questions, Council?
I would run now while you have a chance.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah, thanks, Don. All right, anything else to cover tonight, but Robert? All right,
Not tonight.
okay. Well, sorry, but we might have to end this party, guys. So if there being no other further business for the special budget workshop, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried.